everybody, and welcome to another Thriveabetes interview. Today, I am with Aisling White, who lives in Limerick, but she's originally from Cork. And Aisling is a teacher, and she's here to talk about her diabetes story. So, Aisling, welcome today, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Hello.
Hi. And so, first of all, we're going to start, as we always do, with where your diabetes story begins, and that is at diagnosis. And for you, that was at a very early age. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So I don't remember my diagnosis at all because I was 13 months when I got diagnosed. So my memories are very hairy because I was one.
Yeah.
But from the stories I've heard from other people, my parents, my aunts and uncles, um, basically I was starting to look very sick, so I was turning green. And there's one picture I always remember. There's a picture of me and my cousin who's 6 months younger than me. So we're both in our little carriers, and I look like a newborn, and she looks like she's 6 months older than me because I had lost so much weight. And
Wow.
Yeah, it was absolutely, that picture is always the one that sticks out in my mind as the diagnosis story because it really does look like she's 6 months older than me. Um, so yeah, they took me down to the GP at the time, and the GP said, "Oh, it's a viral infection. Don't worry about it." And a few months later, they did the same thing, and the same thing happened. So my uncle basically talked my parents into it and was like, "She probably needs to go to hospital just to be sure." So they took me into hospital, and after a long time, because I was one of the youngest diagnosed at the time, weren't really expecting diabetes in someone who was 1 year old.
Yeah.
So when they did eventually check my HbA1c, it was 72.
Wow.
So they were like, "She's probably not going to pull through this. Don't We'll do our best, but don't hold your hopes up."
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, it was absolutely crazy. This is the story I've been told now. Again, I'm not remembering this. But yeah, my mom was deathly afraid of needles. So when everything did sort itself out, she had to face that fear and push through that because I needed injections every day. So yeah, I think there was a good few hurdles for them during the diagnosis stage, but for me, diabetes has always just been my life because I can never remember a time that I didn't have diabetes. So in one way, that's a blessing for me because I know when I see people diagnosed in their teens and their 20s, they're like, "I can't have this anymore," or "I can't, have 3 bags of sugary jellies." And I'm like, "Oh, I never really did that." So
Yeah.
for me, and well, now I know we can have those things, but when you're diagnosed first and you're like, "I can't have."
Yep. This is a new concept to a lot of people. The
Yeah,
sweets.
exactly.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on something that you told me about, because when I heard that you were from Cork, and I thought there was a parent support group in Cork at that time, through Diabetes Ireland, and would have been Diabetes Federation of Ireland at that time. And you talked about going on the family holiday to Trabolgan with the diabetes families. Now, you don't really remember that, but something your sister says.
Yeah, so I don't remember it that much at all. I remember more so the teen meetings. I can't really remember the childhood ones. But my sister, only in recent years, said it to me. She was like, "Do you remember that time we went to Travolgan with the diabetes group?" And I was like, "No, I don't, honestly." And she was like, "Oh no, I remember it. We went around and, all the siblings got to come with the children who had diabetes. So we were all just playing around Travolgan." But she said that it was the first time that she met siblings who had siblings who were diabetics as well. So for her, that was like just a great outlet, because she would be like, oh, does your sister wake up in the middle of the night shaking too? Mine does as well. And they'd have these conversations together, which I always, we always consider for the people who are diabetic, because we're like, oh, you need a support group and you need to work together. But her saying that, I was like, wow, you actually did do so much. Like, she shared a room with me when I was younger. She did so much for me when I was younger, and she probably didn't even realize it. But yeah, it's important to have those support groups for the siblings as well.
Yeah, and I definitely would advocate for that as well. Like, the people in our lives who are there when we need them, they need support groups as well, and that's often overlooked. So thank you
Exactly.
for, yeah. Okay, so you mentioned about going to some of the teen meetings down in Cork. I think it was called the Canteen Group support group, but you yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I would say, when I was a teenager, when I was 12, I went on to 4 injections a day. So I was on fast acting and long acting. But I hadn't really gotten so much education about, carb counting and insulin sensitivity factors and all of those lovely things. So when I went to the meetings, it was amazing. They take you out sailing and doing exercise with other people. They would take you into the centre and take you around shopping in town, just to get to meet other diabetics and to interact with them. So like that, it was great to meet them. But I just remember vividly, when we'd sit down to have something to eat, everyone would go, "What's your carb ratio?" And I'd be like, what is a carb ratio? I had no idea, but I was too shy to actually say it. So I would just make up a number based on what everyone else was saying. Because I was like, everyone knows this. I should really know what it is. Okay, my number is 5, and go with that. But yeah, it was great to get to meet up with those other diabetics and to go sailing or do things that you wouldn't normally do. But I suppose for me, it just kind of brought up the fact that I really wasn't educated on what I was doing at the time. I was slightly disengaged in my appointments because of past experiences. So
Yeah.
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 So
So, I
like,
mean, do you want to talk a little bit about your clinic experiences in general terms? I mean, I won't ask you to go into specific details.
yeah, sure. I suppose when I was a child, I remember whoever we were going to see, nurse, endo, GP, whoever, your parent would always be the one in the chair next to the official person, and I would just sit over here twiddling my thumbs, being like, okay, I have to be here, but this isn't really my problem. But I would listen in on the conversation and see what they were talking about. So I just remember, whenever we went to see any professionals, they would almost just like give out to my parents. They were really stern with my parents. And I know for a fact my parents were doing absolutely everything they could to help me to control this thing. But the technology at the time wasn't the same as we have now either.
Yeah.
So, I was saying to you at a previous meeting, when my blood sugar levels would go high, I was told to go out and do laps around the house. So I'd pass the kitchen window and go, 22, run, 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 23, run, run, run. And keep running around the house like a gerbil on a wheel. And now we know you shouldn't exercise if you're high, if you have ketones. But at the time, that wasn't known. So the only thing to bring your blood sugar levels down was go running around the house. But yeah, they wouldn't really explain what was happening. They would more so just be like, why is this happening? And they would say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the professionals would say, well, you should know. And it was kind of a circle like that. So when I went into my teen years, I was put in the chair and I was next to the professional. And the experience was much the same. And I got really disengaged, because I was like, these people, I need help. And I need to be educated I didn't know I needed to be educated at the time, but I was like, I need something. There was one professional when I was in my teens, before you would go into the room with them, you'd get a slip of paper, and the slip of paper said, what were the things on the slip of paper? Name one positive thing about your diabetes. Name one thing you'd like to change, and name one thing you'd like to talk about during this meeting. So immediately when you went in, you had an ownership over that meeting. It wasn't like, oh, I have to go and sit here for this guy to talk at me and then I can go out and live my life again. You knew going in that what you wanted to talk about was being prioritized. So that was a good feeling. But yeah, that people move on and we went back into the same cycle again. So that was the teenage years in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that I know is incorporated into some of the transition programs now from peds into adulthood. And I know there's another member of the community who's involved in setting up that research, and she's with it's a project called D1 now. So I know that's kind of has spread, but back then, like when you were a teenager, that was relatively new thinking. And I mean, the education among healthcare professionals, even, let alone patients, was just so limited during that time. But I mean, the effect that it had on you is still present to this day, from our previous conversations. So, so during your teenage years, you kind of disengaged, but you were still attending appointments. And then
I was always there. Yeah, I would always go to the appointment and sit there idly, but I would always be present in the chair.
Yeah, grin and bear it, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
So then, because you moved up to Limerick then for college, because you went to UL, and things started to change a little bit at that point then, yeah?
Yeah, so when I went to college, I went to Mary I for primary teaching. When I got up here, I was like, oh no, Cork is 1.5 hours away. I can't go to my NGO appointment. I have lectures. And basically talked myself out of it. No need to go down there. It's 1.5 hours away. But I was still keeping up a ruse with myself somehow. I was always, now in fairness, I was always taking my injections. I was always trying to keep an eye, but during college I would just run higher because loads just terrified me. So if I was that bit out of range but on the high side, I wouldn't mind. I'd just run there and that was fine for me. But I was keeping up this ruse with myself because I would still go to my GPs to get my bloods done. So I was like, I'm still looking after it. I'm still keeping an eye on the numbers. So one day I went down to the GPs and they said, would you mind going in to this person to get your bloods done? And I said, okay, no problem. And when I went in, she started taking my bloods and she said, okay, and how's the diabetes going? And I gave my usual answer, grand, you know yourself, few highs, few lows, but we're staying in range most of the time. And that was my blank answer to anyone that asked about my diabetes. And she said, okay, that's good, I guess. And what's your carb ratio? And I went, oh no.
And you know what? I'm going to pause the interview here and take a break, and then we'll come back in part 2. So bear with me for a second, Ashlyn.